Okay, so welcome everyone to today's HDSI Industry Seminar. We have with us today Kaushik, Raha, and Connie Villalba from Elsevier. Some of you may have joined us for September's talk with Brad Allen and Daniel Kershaw. Today, we're actually pivoting to Elsevier's Clinical Solutions Division, which is dedicated to the development of software designed to tackle the most vexing problems in medicine. So Kaushik Raha is the Vice President of Data Science Health Content Operations at Elsevier. He heads a global team of data scientists and domain experts who are extracting knowledge from Elsevier's content at scale using NLP, machine learning, deep learning, and other AI technologies. He oversees the development and deployment of data science and AI-first solutions to enhance Elsevier's product and platform capabilities in healthcare, health education, life sciences, and pharma. Prior to Elsevier, he led data science and innovation teams at Johnson & Johnson and GSK. Kaushik has a PhD in computational chemistry and chemical biology from Penn State and did his postdoc at UCSF in San Francisco. He has numerous publications and patents to his name and has been honored with prestigious awards for his contributions to R&D, innovation, and leadership. Connie Villalba is Director of Informatics Innovation for Elsevier Clinical Solutions. Her focus is on the regulatory and medical legal environment, and she is helping the organization adopt the necessary methodologies to remain compliant as clinical solutions products evolve and fold in ever more sophisticated technology. Dr. Villalba has a PhD from the Center for Neuroendocrine Studies at UMass Amherst, where she studied sex differences in the brain and their behavioral correlates. She was a mass media fellow with the AAAS and an informatics fellow with the National Library of Medicine. Prior to joining Elsevier, Dr. Villalba had a successful career as a medical editor, including at Up to Date and the Mass Medical Society, home to the New England Journal of Medicine. Thus, she has extensive experience with the tenets of editorial quality, publishing ethics, and evidence-based medicine. And in 2018, she served as a Research Without Borders volunteer in Rwanda. So we're delighted to have them, and I'm going to hand over the floor in a moment, but I just wanted to remind everyone that we're using the Q&A module in Zoom. So at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to enter questions with the Q&A button. We will wait until the end of the talk to answer any questions, but feel free to ask questions at any time during the presentations. And if you could also just mention who you're directing your question to, that will help us divide and conquer questions at the end. So thank you very much. Connie, Kaushik, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. All right, let's start the screen. Oh, hang on just a moment. So are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, well, thanks very much for the introduction, Jennifer. The title of our talk today is Solving Clinical Problems with Data Science. And some of what I had prepared to tell you a little bit about myself has already been covered, so I'm just going to jump into the content. So as Jennifer mentioned, we had colleagues who gave a talk to the HDSI group a couple of months ago, and I'm curious, having had that talk, how this audience now understands what Elsevier does. So I was hoping to poll the audience using a Menti poll, and I've included here this photograph of Dr. Anthony Fauci holding up a Cell Press paper during congressional hearings regarding COVID. Because of course, on the one hand, it's something that we're very proud of, and we're proud of the contributions Elsevier has made in the context of the pandemic. But also because I know traditionally we've been thought of as a publisher and primarily, an organization creating clinical content such as Lancet, Journal of the American College of Cardiology, and so forth. So let's pop over to Menti if we could. And I'd like to get a sense from the group what you think Elsevier does beyond publishing. And so you'll just go to menti.com and enter the code that's at the top of the screen, 6852637. And love to hear what you think Elsevier is up to. So, very good. Drug development, that's interesting. Decision-making, bioinformatics, clinical trials. We'll give it a couple more minutes because I'm very curious to see how we're perceived. Decision science, I love that one. Data mining, for sure, analytics. Journals. Knowledge management, yeah, very good. Gender research, oh, interesting. All right, well, I would love for you to continue entering those responses, but I'll jump back over to the slides and continue along. So based on the responses that you gave, it's evident that you've recognized that Elsevier is branching out and expanding beyond its publishing roots. So this is a slide that I've borrowed from Brad Allen and Dan Kershaw's talk, in which they talked about the evolution of our organization and how we've gone from a company that produces products which have as their underlying kind of imperative statement, read this, to products where we're asking the user to search this, to products that actually help the user determine what to do next. So there are brands here that you probably recognize as researchers and academics, Cell, Gray's Anatomy, Science Direct, Clinical Key, and so forth. I'm going to focus on a small part of the vast number of products that we produce, which is the ones that apply to the clinical domain and specifically clinical path. So you'll get a deep dive into clinical path and also a little bit into clinical key. But of course, when you start to make the claim that you're helping clinicians determine what to do next, at that point, regulators start to get involved and interested in how you're producing the software and how you're able to make those claims. And so as an organization, we're preparing ourselves for submitting device certifications. And there's a lot of underlying sort of preparation that goes into those certifications and a lot of documentation regarding how the software is developed, how the content is developed, how it's tested, and so forth. And that's where quality management comes in. So some of you may or may not be familiar with the term clinical decision support. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview of that. This is a definition that I've borrowed from the Office of the National Coordinator for Health Information Technology. It's also the definition that's used in the FDA guidance around clinical decision support. I won't read the definition to you, but suffice to say that it's software that is specifically designed to help clinicians make better decisions. And the software can take a variety of forms, such as alerts and reminders that are rules-based, such that you would interrogate the electronic health record and identify patients who might be, say, due for a vaccination or due for a screening of some sort. It can also take the form of merging clinical guidelines with patient context to identify what portion of the content in the guidelines applies to a given patient. Condition-specific order sets, which are essentially lists of orders that should co-occur or that typically co-occur. And this is meant to both serve as a reminder to the clinician and also to facilitate the workflow of grouping those orders and deploying them ensemble. So Clinical Solutions has a variety of products that all serve this underlying mission of improved decision-making by clinicians. And we start with clinicians in training. So we have software that's built around helping physicians, nurses, and the interprofessional care team learn the skills that they need to have once they go out into the workspace. We have traditional CDS solutions like the ones I just talked about. We also have clinical pathways, which is what I'm going to demo for you in a moment. And then patient-facing solutions as well, video and print content, interactive content for patients. And then, of course, the underlying basis for all of this is the reference materials that we have in products like Clinical Key. So if you consider all of those products together, we actually have 97% penetration in health systems throughout the United States. And we publish about a quarter of the world's clinical content, which of course offers a great opportunity for data scientists. And Kaushik is going to talk to you about the way that he's leveraging that content for other applications and to derive even more knowledge from the content in aggregate. Okay, so let me tell you about Clinical Path. Clinical Path was formerly known as Via Oncology. It's a product that we acquired from the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center a couple of years ago. And it was developed at UPMC by oncologists who recognized that as treatments in oncology became ever more specialized and needed to account for ever more patient parameters and tumor characteristics, it would become increasingly difficult for oncologists to remain current on the guidelines that apply to the variety of patients they might see in a care setting. And so the pathway content, I think I mentioned, is akin to what used to be called an expert system, such that you're asking the clinician a series of branching logic questions whose answers will ultimately lead to a treatment recommendation for a patient with those characteristics. It's a solution that's integrated into the electronic health record and pulls in patient context where available. And because we have all of the usage data regarding how oncologists are interacting with the solution and the treatments that they're deploying, we can therefore feed back analytics about what's being done at that treatment center to the administrators of the cancer center. So this product has fairly broad reach around the United States. We are in 56 practices in 35 states and in different types of cancer care centers or settings, which means that we have some visibility into how patients in these different settings are being treated, and we have those data that we can explore. So I think I mentioned that one of the things that we care about within clinical solutions is to reduce unwarranted variation in care, which really is another way of saying when patients are treated in a way that is inconsistent with what the guidelines recommend. And the reason that's important is it's been demonstrated that when care is discordant with the guidelines, it can sometimes compromise the quality of care and or drive up the cost of care. So by virtue of the data that we're gathering about the clinicians using our solution, we've been able to demonstrate that oncologists remain on pathway at least 80% of the time who use the solution. And some of that work looking at improved compliance with guidelines has actually been published in the peer-reviewed literature. It was done by researchers outside of Elsevier. So we're sort of trying to take an evidence-based approach, not only in the context of the publications we produce, but also in the solutions that we generate. So on the left-hand side, what you see is one of the first things a clinician has to do when they enter a pathway, which is to specify the type of tumor that he or she is dealing with relevant tumor characteristics. And that'll become relevant in a moment, especially once Kaushik gives you some details about the work he's doing. So before I jump over to the demo, this is a slide that I've borrowed from Kaushik's presentation involving the conversion of free text pathology reports into structured fields. So the reason that this is relevant and important is this is something that's somewhat work intensive and time intensive, certainly click intensive for the clinician. And what we're hoping is that through Kaushik's work, we streamline the process of eliciting from the clinician the tumor characteristics that are important in a pathway. So hopefully that will become clear in just a moment. So I've transitioned over to the sandbox environment for clinical path. And what you're seeing is just a list of fake patient names. This is, just for demo purposes, meant to simulate a patient's, a clinician's perhaps roster of patients. So we're going to select Cassandra Elliott as the patient and select a plan of care. So she has breast cancer. And if you can remember a little bit about the slide that I borrowed from Kaushik, it had some tumor characteristics. So we know that she's at the pathologic staging stage. And those, among the things that were noted about her tumor was the size. It was 1.5 centimeters in diameter. So here, if you hover over each of these tumor elements, it gives you some specificity as to what they correspond to. I don't expect you to remember what was on that slide, but you'll just trust me that I'm filling it out correctly. She had no lymph node involvement, no metastasis, a grade 2 tumor. She was estrogen receptor positive, progestin receptor positive, and HER2 positive. And the system will generate a staging and then propose treatment that, depending on what the clinician is interested in deploying at that moment, will assume it's adjuvant therapy. And then based on those tumor characteristics, the system has a recommended treatment approach. So depending on the level of integration that we have with a given cancer center, the clinician could then select the treatment through our solution. And we've mapped those regimens to the corresponding order system within the electronic health record for a given cancer site. Now imagine that that same clinician wanted perhaps a little bit more detail about breast cancer or some aspect of the patient's disease. So they could go to Clinical Key, which is that repository of clinical content from Elsevier, including books, journals, monographs, calculators, and so forth. So I'm going to stop sharing. And now Kaushik is going to tell you about how some of the work he's doing is going to be folded into Clinical Path and/or Clinical Key to augment the experience of the user and facilitate that workflow that we talked about. Kaushik?
Thanks, Connie. I'm just going to do a screen check one more time. I hope you can see my screen. I'll take that as a yes. And thanks for inviting us to give a presentation today at this forum. Really excited to be here. Thanks for the really kind introduction as well. So as Connie was saying, I'm going to talk a little bit about, go into a little more details about how do we go about solving these clinical problems with data science. And you've heard the introduction. I'm Kaushik Raha. I'm VP of Data Science, Health Content Operations, and we work with the clinical solutions team at Elsevier with the idea that we want to, infuse our products with data science and artificial intelligence technologies. So just to start with the outline of what I'm going to touch upon today, a little more of the background and some introduction as well on what we do and how we do it. I'll then tie it up with what Connie was referring to is when we have our products like Clinical Path, how can we make make that product a lot more smart, if you will, where clinicians and doctors can get extractions from these handwritten, from these free text reports, and they don't have to sort of go dig into individual reports and fill up those forms and make the decisions and so on and so forth. And the next thing that I'm going to talk about is also what Connie referred to is in our product Clinical Key, how can we find the content that's favored by clinicians, and we'll find out a little more about what that means. This is usually in images. So how are we doing that, right? How are we getting the stuff that's locked inside of images in front of our customers, who are essentially clinicians and physicians at the point of care. And I do want to end with some acknowledgements of some of the great work that we're doing in my team. So that's where I'll end and move back to Connie. So just to re-emphasize, it was great to see that a lot of you are aware that Elsevier has a big footprint in health and research. We were a publications company, and for the longest time we published journals. So we had a lot of content, but in the context of healthcare, what we decided as a strategy is to go from content that we produce in the medical and clinical domain to supporting outcomes and doing that through providing actionable insights. So in a way, we like to say we want to go from content to care, and that's at least that's what my team is focused on, to take the content, extract the data, and support medical outcomes that will generate actionable insights. And Elsevier Healthcare's mission is to improve every patient outcome. That's something that we are very serious about. And I think we are one of the few companies that are at the forefront of that in this domain. So, there's this idea of patient journey, and I'm sure a lot of you are aware of what it means, but essentially, when a patient is taken into a system, like a provider system or a healthcare system, that's when the journey starts technically, and then all the way through the diagnosis, the treatment, we want to support that entire patient journey till the point they're discharged. And how do we want to do that? We want to do that by aiding the physicians and the clinicians. We want to do that by providing decision support tools. We will also have, our products in education, which are good for training the physicians and the nurse practitioners who are involved in that whole patient journey. And finally, we want to be at the forefront of innovation, partnering with external clients so that we can actually see what's really the next big thing and how can we, help the patient or the patient journey with all our capabilities. So if you look at this chart, you'll see there's the different layers to how we're going to do this. So right at the top are all our applications in reference, in search, and education. And beyond that, there are the sort of the core capabilities or the building blocks of how we can do this. If we come one down, we are in the business of creating, these knowledge graphs, which essentially are graphs of the knowledge or the data that we're extracting from our free-form content of books and journals, and we are encoding it into graphs, which we can use for inference and decision support. But even like one layer beyond that, we also want to sort of be in the weeds with clinicians and help, clinical workflows and do advanced analytics throughout the patient journey in terms of, providing analytics for patient intake, risk prediction, length of stay, and the many different models that we can build to support this whole idea of, the whole patient journey. But really what our strength is in the clinical content, and we don't lose sight of that. So we want to leverage the clinical and the medical content that we have. And, at Elsevier, we have the privilege of doing that because we publish all these great books and all these journals. But what we're also getting into is, marrying that with the clinical data that we're getting access to. And some of that is, that exists in electronic health records in the form of reports such as pathology reports and, radiology reports. So we want to take all of that, tie that up with the clinical content, and that really forms the basis of supporting patient journey. So how do we work? I want to spend a little, minute on this. So I have a team of data scientists and domain experts, but we really are involved in product development with the rest of the organization, and that includes product managers, informaticists, so like Connie. Also includes UX designers, because we are in the business of making these products that are used by clinicians, and we are very much aware that we need good UI UX, and finally the engineering part. We got to do this at scale so that it's deployable. It can be used by thousands of doctors or hundreds of hospital systems and so on and so forth. So we work in what we call squads, where the data scientists and domain experts from my team will really collaborate with engineers, UX designers, product managers, informaticists, and have a roadmap for developing these products based on customer requirements. So it's a very collaborative environment. A little bit more about my team. We have about 60 data scientists and subject matter experts. spread across the globe. We support health in the US and life sciences in Europe. I talked about squads. And finally, we also are always on the lookout for external innovation, engagements and partnerships and collaboration to really see what's out there and what can be leveraged for the mission that we have to improve every patient outcome. So, that's how we work, but what do we really do? And in the context of, clinical solutions or health sciences, what can data science bring to the table? So one of the biggest things that it can do is, extraction of facts. And these are the facts that are existing in our content. Like I talked about the content layer. Elsevier publishes more than 16% of the books and medical books and journals. And these have high quality facts and evidence. This is peer reviewed. People have spent hours producing these observations from research, high quality research. So we want to be able to leverage those, those facts and those evidence. So we will use things like in natural language processing, machine learning, deep learning, and computer vision. And the idea is to extract the facts, extract data from the unstructured world of books, journals, free-flowing content, and do that in an automated or unsupervised fashion. That's why we sort of rely heavily on the latest and the greatest artificial intelligence technologies. So fact extraction. So what does this involve? Fact extraction involves understanding of medical language. As any of you, when you read a journal or a book, you really get the gist of it if that's your domain. How can we teach computers to do this, to essentially take a sentence and parse out the meaning, parse out what relationships are there, what entities are there. So that's really the name of the game, extraction of all those things. And if we are able to do this successfully, it provides basis for what I was referring to before, actionable insights in all our products, for clinical reference or for decision support. And on the left-hand side panel, I've given you an example of how this looks like in practice, right? So you can imagine there's these sentences which are expressing, which have facts, which are expressing relationships. So for the more technically oriented, how do you break down this problem so that we can tackle it? So we try to find the entities or do the entity recognition part. For example, hemoptysis or non-small cell lung cancer is a kind of entity. And what is the relationship between these entities? In this case, this has a clinical finding relationship. It means that hemoptysis has in a non-small cell lung cancer has a clinical finding hemoptysis. Similarly, there might be a relationship between a drug and, again, a disease. So can we train the machines, teach the machines to extract these relationships? And that's where my team comes in, and that's the kind of work that we do. So providing that basis, I do want to dwell a little bit on the challenges behind all of this, right? Clinical language is very complex. I mean, any language is complex, but in clinical language, there are things like ambiguity, synonymy, there's abbreviations where two things can mean the same thing. For example, PAP could mean pulmonary arterial pressure. It could also mean pulmonary alveolar proteinosis, which are different things. Again, different words could have the same meaning. There's the syntax issue. The way people write, clinicians sort of dictate or write the clinical notes has a very different syntax from English or any other normal language. So how do you teach a machine to sort of understand that, right? And of course, there's this idea of named entity recognition. How do we know that something like frontal lobe, how do we teach a machine to always know that what it exactly means? For example, in this case, it refers to a part of the brain. And anytime you see that in any clinical note or any sort of clinical document, it always will mean that most of the time. And that's what we are dealing with, right? So how do we do these things? We have to normalize. We have to figure out how can we find the sort of normalized terms for all of these very complex technical terms that are used in clinical language. So in my mind, clinical NLP provides one more sort of layer of challenges that we deal with. And that's why we need the help of subject matter experts who in my team are, who have MDs and PhDs, who can really understand clinical content and help us, build these algorithms so that we can parse and understand clinical language. So coming back to a very practical use case that Connie was referring to, the task of extracting data from a free text clinical report. In this case, we are talking about a breast cancer pathology report. This is what it looks like. A clinician will go in, and if they're interacting with Clinical Path, the software that Connie was demoing, they would actually have to sort of find these different entities, and they would have to put that in. And that's a resource intensive task, as you can imagine. It's not also the smartest, the best use of the time of someone, someone who in that position. So how can we make this easier? How can we extract these different quantities from a breast cancer clinical report? And that's the kind of technology that we are developing and have developed. So for example, in this case, you can see that these are the entities that we have focused on: a site, surgical approach, tumor size, a status, and then also laterality, TNM staging, and so on and so forth. So I don't want to give you all the details of how we do this, but I want to give you an idea of how are we extracting some of these quantities and making it available for our products, and also for other sort of use cases. So if you look at the right hand side of the box here, these are the 4 quantities that we started our sort of proof of concept with, and TNM staging is an important one. And if you remember the screenshot from Clinical Path, some of these code letters are associated with the stage of the breast cancer, and that's something that's really important. And if you can extract those reliably from these clinical reports. And there's a lot of challenges in this. A lot of the reports that we get are not the best quality. Some of them are images, some of them are handwritten. So we have to deal with all those complexities and still have to do a very good job in terms of the precision and recall, the retrieval of the information, if you will. So, we started with a rule-based information retrieval approach, and that's what we sort of implemented. And we worked with a public data set of about 722 breast cancer pathology reports from the TCGA. And we created a workflow which was essentially for extracting those entities that I showed you in the previous slide. And for the purpose of brevity, we sort of focused on tumor type, laterality, TNM, and tumor sizes, and the number of lymph nodes. And I don't sort of want to go into all the details, but there's a lot here. We work with images as well as free text, plain text. We also work with structured XML. So we have to sort of navigate that and figure out what do we want to extract from that. We do a lot of very common NLP techniques that are used for processing text. But one of the main things that I want to sort of focus on is the named entity recognition and the normalization to UMLS. And this is where I was saying that a lot of effort is from my team goes into doing this part, where we need to normalize the corpus to taxonomy or an ontology. In this case, we've used UMLS. And we need subject matter experts who can do that normalization, say that when I see DCIS or ductal interstitial carcinoma, that's the same thing. So that normalizes to one term. So can the machine do that? Can we teach the machine to do that? So essentially, using workflows and tools of ML and NLP, we are doing that. We're extracting tumor type, laterality, and number of lymph nodes from these pathology reports. In terms of evaluating how we are doing, there are fairly typical metrics like sensitivity, precision, recall that are used in activities like this. But we also think that Cohen's kappa is a good metric. And again, for the technically oriented, it's essentially the agreement between the true labels and the predicted or extracted labels by our machine, by our models. So if you look at this confusion matrix or this graphic here, if the true labels are exactly the same as the predicted labels, which means we did a fantastic job, all the diagonals will be populated, and that would be a perfect score. What the Cohen's kappa also gives you is what is the accuracy when it's corrected for chance performance. In other words, are we getting lucky when we are doing this? So it is a statistical thing, but it just gives you a little more of a normalization about just the accuracy. So essentially, that's what we are using to evaluate our methodology. Not to bore you with too many results, but we do fairly well with the extraction on the TNMs. So the Cohen's kappas are on the greater than 0.8, and also the sensitivity and the recall are in that territory. So we are actually saying that our NLP methods are performing quite well on the extraction of the TNM from these fairly obtuse and low quality reports that we have for breast cancer pathology. Similarly, for the tumor size, tumor type, and lymph nodes, we do well. It's it's not as probably good as TNMs, but it's still quite competitive. But this is just a demonstration of we can develop these capabilities, we can refine them, and then we can use it in our products, such as the Clinical Path, which makes life easier for clinicians, but it also helps us sort of unlock the content that might be available in many different sources, electronic health records, which are existing in hospital systems. So one of the other things that we are doing is going to other hospitals with this technology and saying, hey, we can do this for you. And if you want, we can, come up with partnership collaborations to do this. So after having spoken about the breast cancer pathology approach, let me just switch gears and talk about unlocking physician favorite content. And this is the second topic that I mentioned in the outline. And this is a really interesting project where we are looking at images of decision trees and asking the question, can we actually unlock this content and make it available at the point of care at hospitals for clinicians as a reference tool for them to sort of answer questions that they might have right then at that setting. And what we found was decision trees, or these flowcharts, are highly information dense, and they are very good synoptic tools where you can find answers to the questions that you're looking for really quickly without having to dig through paragraphs of texts and so on and so forth. It turns out that Elsevier corpus also has a lot of decision tree images. At last count, we had more than 33,000 images of decision trees just for these years, 2015, 2017. And the idea is that if we can actually unlock the content, traverse these trees, we can provide a lot of value for clinical decision support, reference, synoptic content, and so on and so forth. So in some ways, an image is worth 1,000 words. And we are really sort of reinforcing that idea with the decision tree or a flowchart. So, again, if you're technically oriented, you might say that, oh, this seems like an OCR problem. Why not just use OCR, which is optical character recognition? There are tons of sort of offerings out there which do that, OCR, and why not just use that? The problem we run into is using OCR. It has no context awareness of or sort of boundaries of the content that's, and I'm sorry, this is going transitioning, but for some reason. So the boundaries of the text that's here. So that's what we run into with OCR. It pretty much produces garbage when you just use OCR directly. So what we have done is developed what we call DT-Decon, decision tree deconvolution, and it's a general purpose computer vision based AI method for decision tree deconvolution. What we can do is take a diverse set of decision tree or flowchart images, and we can unlock the content that's in there, and we can make it available for answering questions, for decision support, and so on and so forth. Again, we categorize a decision tree image in various different ways. We have these evidence nodes, the tree frame, and what we do with our algorithms is take images of such decision trees or flowcharts, and through a very sort of complex methodology, we are able to extract the text content, and not just the text content, but also the frame of the decision tree. And what this allows us to do is essentially digitize these images so that they can be read by machines, they can be used for machine learning or NLP processes further downstream. So again, for we use computer vision for deconvolution. There's a lot of details here, and we also use deep learning and machine learning for extracting information flow. And just to give you a little more on the technical side, what we have done is we've used deep learning based transfer learning models for image deconvolution. And I find this to be really cool. And Metal and Sandora, the data scientist who's actually working on this, it was this brilliant idea that a decision tree or an image of a decision tree or flowchart essentially is a scene detection problem. And this is what deep learning models are doing for things like automated or driverless cars or automated street scene recognition. This is what, for example, the Tesla system uses, right? So can we use those kind of models? Can we use those kind of concepts to apply to what is a scene detection? And I have to say that we have done a really good job of that, of taking these models, which are already been optimized for scene detection, and applied it to an image of a decision tree or a flowchart. And what we can do is convert a flowchart to a connected graph or a directed graph, which can further be sort of deconvoluted into other data structures such as tables, etc. So once you have something in a table format, it becomes much more consumable, it becomes much more machine readable, and there are other fun things we can do with it. So that's kind of the basis of the technology. We're using these deep learning models which have been developed for other purposes and applying it to for our purposes. And we filed a patent which just got granted, so really pleased about that. And we'll have a few more coming down the pipe on this technology. Just a quick sort of evaluation slide. We did an evaluation on a corpus of about 70 images, and our method does quite well, more than 90% accuracy in extraction of the text and the structure, as evaluated by SME, subject matter experts. So we've taken a bunch of Elsevier medical books and done this exercise of evaluating it. So it works really well. But I mean, again, an image is worth 1,000 words. If you look at the right-hand side panel, you can see that in purple, this is the performance of our algorithm, where it really sort of localizes all the content that's enclosed in boxes. Whereas if you use something off the shelf like Amazon's recognition, it kind of, it doesn't do that well. And just to caveat that a little bit, this is a little bit of an older slide, so maybe it's better now. But as far as we know, this is best in class in terms of deconvoluting these images. So what we're really doing is taking an image and converting it to knowledge, and so we're going from content to data to knowledge. I should also mention that as we are doing this, we are also associating all the provenance that's associated with an image. So we are capturing, the publication that it was in, the publisher, the language. We're going down to the point of capturing the captions, as well as, what was the context of that image. So all of this allows us to really answer questions at the point of care, where a decision tree might be in a pediatrics book. So we want to take that into account for answering a question related to pediatrics. So that's kind of what it helps us do when we capture the provenance. And again, this is all machine readable, so you can do a lot of cool things with it. And that's what we've done. So this technology has been used for authoring searchable interactive algorithms. It's used for search relevancy and providing synoptic content. It's also we also use to convert images, like I talked about, into tabular data that can be further used for automatic question answer generation. So there are many applications, and our products really benefit from a capability like that we've developed. I think that's the end of what I wanted to say. I do want to acknowledge my team. These are my, we have data scientists and domain experts who are involved in clinical analytics or knowledge representation. Definitely want to acknowledge all these people, and I don't want to go through all these names, but if you look at the backgrounds, we have a really good mix of people with bioinformatics PhDs, applied mathematics, computer science, and even physics. So I want to take this opportunity to invite you to collaborate with us, and please reach out to me or Connie if you have ideas to collaborate, or even look for jobs. If you're looking for job opportunities, please get in touch. We would love that. Love to have that feedback. I think that's kind of where I want to end, and back to Connie.
Thanks very much, Kaushik. So we have a couple of questions available now. I will take those in a moment, but let me, oops. You would think after all the Zooming we've been doing, I'd be super adept at screen sharing, but I haven't quite mastered it yet. I'm going to jump back to a comment that Kaushik made regarding the desire for collaboration. So I have on the slide in front of you a list of data assets that we've made available. There's a subgrouping related specifically to the coronavirus pandemic, and that includes content that we've published either specifically about COVID-19 or other coronaviruses, which might inform how the current virus is functioning. But also we've made available some of the tools that we have for researchers, such as data management solutions for folks who are working specifically on the coronavirus problem. Likewise, there are other data sets, not necessarily related to COVID, both in the form of content as well as chemical structures and other types of assets that Elsevier has, all with an eye toward helping you folks get at the kinds of data you might want in your research. And so I would encourage you all to have a look there if you have questions that you would ask of Elsevier assets. And if it's not there, what you're looking for, please contact Jennifer Pamphile, who's in our research collaboration office. She might be able to facilitate access to those data. I have a Menti that I'd like to close with, but why don't we take the questions now, because there's a couple of interesting ones there. So someone has asked, in clinical path, how do you ensure robust, safe treatments, whether it is used correctly or incorrectly? So regarding the robust, safe treatments, first of all, I love that this question is being asked. There are a number of checks and balances that we have both in the content development process as well as in the software generation process. So let's start with the content. The content is based upon the NCCN guidelines, which are the nationally recognized cancer guidelines, augmented by other peer-reviewed evidence that might be available. We have a content team dedicated to understanding and parsing those guidelines. But just as important, the oncologists who practice at the centers where our solution is used are invited to become committee members representing the different specialties that we include in our solution. And those committee members actively shape the content themselves. So it's a very interactive content development process. And we have representation from throughout the sites that we serve. So it's very much a solution by oncologists for oncologists. And they also take a role in testing the product before we roll it out. So they will click through the different interactive features and confirm that their expected results are as they should be. And of course, before that testing occurs, we do a lot of internal testing as well. So that gets at the content. We also have safeguards in place regarding, feedback mechanisms such that clinicians who are using this solution, should they ever identify content or some functionality that they think is amiss, we take that feedback very seriously. We consider it essentially peer review, and we fold it back into the product as we receive it. The other important thing is that nothing is automated. So a clinician can't make a decision sort of by accident, so to speak. We're there to augment the practice. We're not there to replace the physician. And all of the underlying content upon which the pathways are based is available within the solution. So if we make a treatment recommendation and the clinician wants to understand whence that recommendation comes, they can click through to the underlying guideline or research paper where we've derived that information. Let's see. I think I've touched on the main ways that we ensure the quality. If I haven't answered your question, please ask a follow-up, but we do take that very seriously, and thanks for asking the question. The second question is, physicians are in general reluctant to rely on systems that they do not understand. How does your team convince them to rely on machine learning, often thought of as black boxes? Well, so I will say that in the products that we have in the field today, we don't have black boxes running. But let's imagine in a future state where the work that Kaushik is doing in interpreting pathology reports is used to pre-select the relevant parameters within a pathway. Our intention is to pre-select those parameters, but make sure that the clinician confirms our selections are correct. So they would be afforded the opportunity to look at the pathology report with the relevant factors highlighted and say, have we interpreted correctly? And in fact, ideally, what we would do is if in the case of the pathology interpretation, the clinician selects something different from what we have supposed, that would feed back into the system and fine tune, if we've gotten something incorrect. But you're right that when black boxes are used, physicians are reluctant. Please, Kaushik.
I just wanted to say, Connie, this, just to add to that, we use what I mentioned as provenance, right? So if we are doing things like fact extraction and a model is making a prediction, then we want to sort of tie it back to where that fact was or came from. So we preserve that trail, right? So we capture the provenance, and that goes a long way to convince a physician that this can, although the model might be black box, but we can exactly tell you where that insight is coming from. So just wanted to add that. Yeah.
Fantastic. No, I think we're on the same page there, Kaushik. So the last thing I was hoping to do was, now that you know a little, oh, there's a question for you, Kaushik.
So the question is, are there any internship opportunities? Is that the question that I'm, internship opportunities or college outreach division? Yes. So the short answer is yes. We have internship opportunities, every semester, and I guess Jennifer would be the person to reach out about those. But you can also reach out to me directly. I have to say that we have a very good system in place where we have great interns and they go on to sort of join our team. So yeah, please do reach out.
So while we wait for questions to come in, I would love to now, having given you a little bit more background on clinical solutions, but also Elsevier as a whole, I would love to poll this group to learn a little bit more about ideas you may have about how Elsevier might further harness data science. And especially if it's something that you would like to do in collaboration with us, that would be particularly interesting. But even if it's just work that you would have us do, that would be of tremendous value to us. People are shy on the Menti. It looks like there's one more question coming in. Oh, no. So there's another question. If the pathways are not black boxes, as Connie mentioned, does that mean that currently all the recommendations decision trees are input by subject matter experts instead of an algorithm? Yes, that's correct. Today, that is how it's done.
I'm just here to say we have maybe time for one more question if there's anything out there. I can also see that Connie's Menti poll is also filling up. So I just wanted to give us all a moment to wrap up.
So the suggestion that we should be doing more analytics from our published content, that's exactly what we're hoping to do. If you have specific suggestions regarding what kind of analytics or what questions we would be asking of our data, that would be very welcome. And or if you'd like to do it yourself, let's talk. Ethics. So ethics is something that's very dear to our hearts. We care a lot about publishing ethics, of course, but that is a broad topic, and how we use data science in the context of ethics, that's very broad. I would love to hear specifics from the audience as to what that means to them. Let's see. Applied what? I'm not sure. Okay. Distributed computing. Kaushik, is that something that you're familiar with, that concept, distributed?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are, we do distributed computing for our data science models. So a lot of the work is, very resource intensive. So that's something that we have a lot of expertise in. We have moved to the cloud, but we also actually did have an HPCC system that we still use. So yeah, that's something that's one of our core strengths right now. So.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I love that you folks have been interactive with us today. As Kaushik said, when it comes time to job hunt, please think about Elsevier as a possible place to land. We are transitioning into a data science company, but still keeping our roots in publishing, of course.
All right. Well, thank you, Kaushik. Thank you, Connie. That was enlightening and interesting and all sorts of good things. We will, Jennifer Pamphile from Elsevier's email information is in the chat box. So if anyone wants to follow up, that's available to you. And otherwise, just bring this session to a close. Our next industry seminar is on November 10th with SBG Sports, which creates race strategy software for Formula One racing. So it's a bit of a departure from this topic, but we hope you'll join us. Okay, otherwise, thanks all for attending. Thanks for your questions, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you very much.
Thanks again. Take care.